Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our peer-to-peer Roundtable Live. I am really excited about this afternoon's conversation. I just want to have a special shout out and thank you to our friends from Fifth Third Bank who make this entire platform possible. So thanks again, and let's kick off. Today, we're focused on supply chain. And there's certainly been some interesting things with the supply chain, whether it's disruptions, new partnerships. I really look forward to digging in as we think about and talk about supply chain. I'm Amy Thompson, Leadership Program Senior Director, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. I hope that you've had a chance to already tap into some of our resources, but if not, I wanted to make sure you know that at the Chamber, we have both the restart.com, restartcincinnati.com that is, and that is a place where you can go to find additional resources that may absolutely be helpful for you through this time. We also invite you to our regular Chambers website. Make sure you're getting our daily emails, and we also have a resource hub to help you through this time as well. So let's jump in. Our peer-to-peer Roundtable Live is really created for you to have a chance to connect with other leaders that are experiencing the same thing. So a couple things I'll mention. If you all don't mind staying on mute, that'll help us avoid some of the background noise. But we are going to ask you, once we open the discussion, to make sure you turn on your video. That way we can truly connect with each other. We will also have a chance to break out into small breakout rooms, and you will need your video on at that point so that you can truly talk with other people that are in the room. This is a chance for you to make some new connections, to really dig in on the conversation. So let's have some fun. One more piece of information. At the bottom of your screen is the chat feature. If you'll open that up, we will use that throughout our presentation as well. If a topic comes up and you want to add to it for the rest of the listeners to know of a resource or a link that you want to share, please use the chat feature, or a question, feel free to post that as well. Excellent. Before we dive in and meet this incredible panel, I just want to say another thank you to our friends from Fifth Third. They have invested in this entire platform because they know that leadership right now is so critical. They have put together a real brief overview for us to hear a couple words from them about why this is an important time to lead and an important time that Fifth Third is there for all of us. Let's hear from Fifth Third.
For more than 160 years, Fifth Third Bank has been a champion of dreams. It's the dreams of those who work hard for a better tomorrow. That drive us. As we've always done, we're here to support our customers, their families, their businesses, and our communities.
So thank you again. We're so thrilled Fifth Third is a part of this. Speaking of, I am so excited to introduce this incredible panel, which includes a Fifth Thirder. So let's jump in. First of all, I'd like to make sure you all know we have a number of great people with us today, including Bryan Bensman, Senior Director of Compliance, Global Logistics, Corporate Fleet from Cintas. Bryan, thank you for being here. Mike Urich, the Director of Contracts Purchasing and Value Analysis from CCHMC, otherwise known as Children's Hospital. Thank you for being with us. Jeiza Nichols, a special shout out to you, my friend. I appreciate you sparking this and saying, hey, let's get supply chain leaders together. So thrilled you had that idea and we're on board to pull this together. So Jeiza, thank you. Supplier, Diversity Manager from Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. And Stephanie Smith, Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer from Fifth Third Bank. Welcome, everyone. Let's jump in. Mike, I'd like to start with you and have you really just open up by share with us an understanding of what have been some of the disruptions at Children's Hospital these last couple of months. How have you been impacted? How did you respond? And are there any key lessons that our other listeners should take away?
Sure, thanks, Amy. Well, like I said, the first thing we noticed was the disruptions in our PPE, personal protective equipment, from the manufacturers in China. So once that started to slow down after everything that happened in China, That was where the major production happened for our mask gowns. We then noticed a huge influx of companies entering the market offering us products. A lot of these companies were unfamiliar with PPE. They had to learn what stuff was about how to handle a sample, the specifications we were asking for, whether they were FDA compliant, NIOSH for respirators. And then we soon started encountering a lot of counterfeit products. So it was a big learning curve for the companies who were trying to enter this market, who were trying to provide us a service and a product, but due to their unfamiliarity and a lot of unscrupulous manufacturers, we had to vet through all that, through that product that was being offered to us. But then we noticed the long lead times because a lot of stuff was coming either from overseas, China way, or Europe. We noticed a massive increase in pricing, as you can imagine. We were not used to the payment terms of cash up front versus a purchase order. So that was a lot of at-risk funding. Like I said, I don't think the companies were trying to, we would have received our product, but receiving the product 8-9 months from now wasn't going to help us if we couldn't get it in the short term for that large outlay of cash. We noticed some banking challenges. A lot of the unfamiliar vendors, the banks were a little skeptical because they'd heard about all the counterfeit products and they were not familiar with the vendors that we were trying to use who were untraditional in the space. Created some slowdowns for us. Massive changes in the work environment, working from home. What it did spur then, some of the stuff is there was a lot of collaboration with the area hospitals here in Cincinnati. We all got together, shared our woes, tried to share sources, tried to go in on some big buys. Some of the stuff worked out, some of the stuff didn't. And the big lesson learned was having a pandemic stock. I think all of us going forward will beef up our pandemic supply so that we have a buffer of masks, gowns, cleaning supplies in case we do go through this in the future. So that's pretty much the lay of the land from Cincinnati Children's Supply side of the house.
So it sounds like everything was perfect, totally
Oh,
normal.
yeah, absolutely.
No disruptions at all.
None.
Mike, I really appreciate you walking us through some of those things. And I'd actually like to ask that the listeners on the call that just in the chat box, go ahead and share with the rest of us, what was your #1 disruption? Or even you probably have 3 to 5 to 10 similar to many others here on the call, but just let's continue to see the flow. What were some of the greatest challenges? Was it the lead time, the counterfeit, what new vendors? What were some of your greater challenges? Feel free to put that in the chat. And one of those that's coming in, I'd love to hop over to Jeiza. You have certainly seen a significant disruption, as we just heard from Mike. And one of the things that you noticed is this also brought about some opportunity. You had an opportunity to create some new partnerships as some of these vendors that were coming forth offering PPE. I'd love for you to share a little bit of that story with everyone else on the call to see if others had similar experiences.
Sure. Thank you very much, Amy, and thanks so much for inviting Cincinnati Children's to be a part of this dynamic discussion around this particular topic. As Mike mentioned, we are a healthcare organization, and as a healthcare organization, there are certain requirements that we have when we are procuring our PPE, be it our gowns, our bouffant hats, our gloves, our masks, our respirators, of course. And so many institutions, they did step up and they wanted to offer from a supplier standpoint, but also from a donation standpoint. So some of the items that were not specific for our use at Cincinnati Children's, we were able to deploy those throughout the community. One example is the YWCA. The YWCA, whom I happen to serve on the board, just in full transparency, they had a need around personal protective gear for their frontline workers that were still out in the community having to serve some of the most vulnerable in our community. And so some of the PPE equipment that didn't work for Cincinnati Children's, we were able to have our diverse suppliers and some of our broader suppliers redeploy that to the YWCA. Also with the Cincinnati Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired, we were able to form some partnerships there. And of course, our continued partnership with the Greater Cincinnati Health Collaborative.
Jeiza, thank you for sharing that. It's a great example of, gosh, so many organizations had this need. Where are we going to get these different supplies? Children's things weren't meeting certain codes or regulations, but they could certainly help some of the nonprofits that you were mentioning and sharing. It brings me to a point when we talk a lot about Cincinnati. We often in different conversations talk about one of our greatest strengths here locally is that this is a collaborative town. You can see it in so many different sectors. And Jeiza and Stephanie, I'd love for you to just highlight a couple of things. Certainly, what were some of those collaborative efforts that were happening both in the healthcare, but also in the banking industry?
First, I'd like to thank Jeiza for the support, Children's Supported CABVI. I'm on the board for that organization, and truly, you know, children's and our hospital systems are best in class in the city. As we think about collaborations, you know, when this pandemic occurred, I think we all went through a period of shock first. It was unreal as we hurried from our offices to work virtually. I remember being in a conversation on a board with a not-for-profit, and I said that Wednesday, you guys, I haven't heard you mention COVID. Little would I know that later that afternoon, the mayor would have a sheltering in place. But our conversations with our corporations, our customers continue. There's approximately almost for 50% of our workforce didn't experience any interruption. They are still business as usual. Our retail centers are open, et cetera. So I was in conversation with Kroger about a collaboration that we were already working on with Procter & Gamble. And I received a message, Amy, as you saw, I think, with John Sig, that our own Fifth Third Bank was in need of PPE equipment. And we needed, you know, everything every American needs, hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, because the last thing we want our customers to feel is that they're unsafe in their banking relationship. The last thing we want our employees to feel is unsafe in their banking relationships as they're on the front lines representing us every day. And so I just decided, I knew this was going to be a squeeze, but I decided that I'd ask Kroger, and they were like, Stephanie, this is a tough call. They were able to provide me with the names of 4 diverse suppliers that they were successfully able to partner with to get some of those products. And we were able to partner with them. The National Minority Supplier Development Council sent us a list of diverse suppliers nationally with specific focuses on hand sanitizer, on the things that Fifth Third needed in order to keep our communities and our customers safe. And so I think that from that perspective, working with the Minority Business Accelerator and a letter of intent to get them grant funding, important grant funding, to support the minority businesses in our region that are disparately impacted by these efforts. I think that collaboration across the board is the name of the game in a pandemic if we intend to survive and beat this thing.
Absolutely. And Stephanie, you mentioned in an earlier conversation the collaboration amongst the banks, which often, let's be real, can compete with each other, but there was a collaborative spirit from the very top. Do you mind sharing some of that information as well?
Thank you, Amy. Yes, I think it's important for our community members to understand that we as corporations understand there's a time for competition and there's a time for ceasefire. And so when this pandemic broke out, I'm sure many of you are aware of the PPE initiative, the loan initiative, the incredible $320 billion that went through the first round, then a second round of financing for that. And of course, Fifth Third and every financial institution in this city was involved in that. The one thing that the CEOs do is they meet on a regular basis. They meet weekly. The CEOs of all the financial institutions meet on a weekly basis, and they talk about how they can collaborate. And when the PPP dollars came out, they all put their hands in the middle and said, we will not be competing and pilfering each other's customers at this time. What we need to do is focus our efforts on getting these dollars out. To give you the magnitude of this, Fifth Third does historically on an annualized basis about 400 small business SBA loans. During this process, we've done 33,000. in a matter of days. And that has supported over 500,000 jobs. So you can see that we needed to focus on the PPP. We didn't have time to fuss over who got what, who got where. We need to get these dollars out because we're competing against the nation. Now remember, we got to take care of we got to take care of all people, but we want to take care of our people. And so we've got to help support our small businesses. And so it was all hands on deck. Employees were working 7 days a week. From other divisions, from finance, it was all hands on deck. They were processing loans at all hours of the night to ensure that our small businesses had access to the finances that they need to maintain their employee base and keep their businesses economically viable and ongoing.
Stephanie, thank you.
Amy,
Oh, go ahead, Jeiza.
Just one unusual partnership too that came out of this pandemic process. We are a medical and healthcare facility. However, Cincinnati Children, we received a large donation of masks from the Ford Motor Company. So the automotive industry stepped in and was a big supporter, as well as we have minority businesses that are in the space of construction. And we received a donation of PPE equipment from the construction industry. So again, we are very much a collaborative town, but through this pandemic, I think we're seeing this collaborative spirit as a nation because, it sounds cliche to say that we're all going to get through this together, but I don't know how we wouldn't get through it if it's not together. So it's just been an outpouring of support, and even Cincinnati Children's being a pediatric institution, we of course are seeing tremendous help and offering tremendous help to the adult healthcare facilities. And again, we had the makeshift hospital that was inside the Duke Energy Center. So again, here it is, we have one of our convention industry or convention venues that's now stepping up to be a partner in all of this. So we're seeing great partnership within minority business, general business, city government, as well as the county in this process.
Jeiza, thank you. I appreciate those. It truly is a great sentiment about Cincinnati, and everything from how do we put as much money back into our community with the financial institutions coming together to say, we're in this together. We literally want to pour as much money back into the Cincinnati region as we can. To Jeiza, your point of whether it's the health collaborative, bringing people together, the different institutions to say, okay, how do we make sure that we really truly take care of the health of people here in our region? And I'll share a personal story that I heard from another partner who, unfortunately, their child was sick in Chicago, and they were trying to do everything they could to get them back to Cincinnati because the healthcare is so strong here. There's just an incredible, great reputation on the collaboration and the care that's provided. Jeiza, do you mind sharing a little bit, very briefly, and then we'll move forward? What were some of those collaborative efforts? Were there any amongst the healthcare industry on specific supply chain issues?
Well, and actually, I'm going to probably toss that to Mike because as a part of the Health Collaborative, there is a subcommittee of supply chain professionals that meet and work through that collaboration.
Yes, we met weekly during this process. We've slowed down since, but with all the turmoil going on, trying to keep ourselves together, trying to vet the companies, trying to understand who is offering us what. We wanted to do business. It was just a matter of could they handle the volume and how fast could that volume get into our hands. So and the word we used was pivot. There were a lot of companies pivot, from hand sanitizer companies, local distilleries offering us, hand sanitizer, working on the FDA formula. They were all learning and moving very quickly. But then it came down to like, okay, I can't use a 55-gallon drum. It's a safety concern. I have no place to dispense it. So we worked through a lot of challenges together through the community. There was a ton of response and a willingness to help from the donations. So yes, the collaborative was alive and well, and I think there's a lot of lessons learned and a lot of things will be taken out of this as we move forward, for sure.
Perfect. Mike, thank you. And you teed us up perfectly. There are so many lessons learned from all of this. We actually wanted to take a moment for the folks on the call to have a chance to share, kind of in a small group setting. So I'm asking my colleague Spencer to break the group into groups of about 4 people, and you'll have about 10 minutes with each other. And during this 10 minutes, you will be in a Zoom breakout room. It'll literally kind of take you out into these different rooms. This will be a chance for each of you to share, introduce yourselves, a brief bit about your business. What have been some of your challenges or your lessons learned? We want you all to learn literally from each other through this time. If you have any questions, you'll notice some buttons at the bottom. You can ask for the host to pop in and certainly help you. Otherwise, we will be back together in about 10 minutes. Anyone in the conversation can get the conversation going. So please make sure you have a meaningful time in your small group breakout. Let's go. Well, thank you all and welcome back. I'd love to just open the floor, and I'll remind people to take yourself off mute and to share just briefly, what was your conversation? Were there any nuggets or lessons learned or challenges that you'd still like to put out there for the rest of the group? And this can be from anyone on the call, not just one of our panelists.
Hey, Amy, it's Bryan. I'll start off and talk on behalf of Marty Grogan, who Marty's works with Amstan, and he and I know each other in terms of supply chain experience and groups locally. That was Marty, Jeiza, myself. And so Marty just spoke of the challenge and kind of that transportation market where they work with asset-based carriers, and the fact that the demand just dropped significantly, the rates dropped significantly, and so many of their carriers were not able to continue to sustain business. So they've seen, their volume in April and May only be about 60-65% of what it traditionally is. And so they've had to, kind of pivot, adjust in terms of managing the remaining business and relationships. But then also Marty, shared first and foremost just the flexibility and agility to adjust to working remotely, which they were not positioned to from a company standpoint. So not supply chain specific, but general business specific. And he gave credit to his IT team to make that happen. And then as we were concluding and talking about key lessons learned or going forward, he kind of validated that from maybe a mindset shift where they always thought they had to be in person and face to face everything, they've really realized, wow, there's a way we can be equally, if not more effective by making that maybe an ongoing or sustainable work environment. Maybe opens them up to more quality individuals for the company from an employment standpoint, gives the right flexibility. And so how they've tried to take advantage of this time to really make those process improvements or efficiency improvements so that they can overall be effective as again, business returns.
Yeah, Bryan, it's a great point. It's not a supply chain thing. This is something that's applying to a lot of the businesses, but this whole work from home and literally, can people start saving money doing this? Businesses start saving money. There's a real number of businesses that are really thinking about this as a go forward and what could that look like. So Bryan, I appreciate you sharing your conversation. Would love to open it back out to hear from one other. If we have anybody else that would like to share, would be great. You also have your names on your tiles, so I can just call on somebody, which is always a good time.
I would say that there's going to be a lot of, like we talked about, lessons learned. What does the future hold for, production? How many of our companies bring the domestic production back? Is it an opportunity for Cincinnati to have PPE locally or, hand sanitizer, whatever? Will any of this innovation last, or will it just be taking advantage of the current market?
You know what, it's Mike, it's a really important point because like we've said, we want to try to make Cincinnati a great region. And so if we start thinking about supply chain here locally, that certainly changes the game. That's probably a nice dovetail into our next question, which is really starting to think about the supplier diversity and the inclusion efforts that are happening. And certainly in a regular time, that's a high priority. Would love to hear, Stephanie, if you wouldn't mind just jumping in. I know you shared some earlier examples, but when you think about the last couple of months, how have you all really navigated and looked at how can we make sure we're still creating a diverse supply chain and really inclusive efforts as well?
Absolutely, Amy. As you may be aware, Marsha Thornton is our Director of Supplier Diversity and is really responsible for driving our efforts in that regard. I'd like to talk about, we've used the word pivot a lot, like, we've moved from agile to pivot. I guess that's our new agile word. But we had one of our women-owned businesses, Marsha identified Amy Thompson, who owns a company called On Flow, and they work on creating menstrual equity. Yes, I said that word out loud, and it's hard to figure out how are they going to pivot in a pandemic, but they did. They pivoted their business from feminine products to making masks. As a result of that effort, they were one of the earlier diverse companies to do that. We purchased, through our community and economic development, $32 billion community commitment, we purchased 15,000 masks for hospitals within the Detroit area. As you all know, Detroit was one of the hot spots and continues to be during this pandemic. And so we were able to make those donations. And so as we were looking at expense control, which is a reality, one of the things that occurred with Fifth Third is that we lost, talking about offshoring, Mike, I want to turn in that direction and say that you're right in terms of how we're looking to onshoring some of the services that we offshored. We have a partnership and a joint venture with a company called SLK that's out of India that does our lockbox. And our lockbox, we do about $60 billion of deposit lockbox and about 120 million transactions. In one day, we lost 2,000 employees that did data entry for that. So yours truly, yes, me, took on lockbox. Like I said, it was all hands on deck. As a result of that, Mike, Fifth Third is now looking at what do we need to do to onshore some of these critical services now that they've been impacted by a pandemic. We cannot allow a foreign government to have control of our billing and our key deposits for our customers. So fortunately, the employees were sufficient. Fifth Third was one of the few banks to maintain a 99% deposit rate, while other banks fell weeks behind. And I think that's because we as employees are committed to ensuring that if our president CEO says they're keeping all employees, then when they ask us to go the extra mile, we're doing it easily. So those are some of the other pivots that I wanted to mention. But as we're looking at the supply chain, obviously it's about expense control. We are now starting to look at our top suppliers that we spend money with. And we're gonna have to go to them, and these apparent generosities are gonna have to be paid for. And so when they're looking at those top suppliers, our chief sourcing officer actually called Marsha and I and said, are there any diverse suppliers that would be impacted in this top 50? We said yes, and here's who they are. And so they know that those diverse suppliers are much smaller than a lot of those top suppliers. I mean, we're talking about Oracle, Black Knight. These are names that you all know, FSI, those people are billionaires. If we ask them to give us $1 million, oh, well, whatever. But for a smaller, diverse organization, that means employees less than 500. If we ask them for $1 million, it could mean grievous circumstances and potential disruption, significant disruption of their business as usual. So as a result of the feedback from Marsha and I, the diverse suppliers will be taken off the plate unless we absolutely need to ask them. So those are the types of things that we're doing, Amy, to ensure that in this pandemic, we are sustaining those companies that are most vulnerable.
Appreciate that very much, and thank you for leading the way on this. And I know that's something that others on this call are very much thinking about as well. Jeiza, Mike, or Bryan, do you want to jump in? Are there similar efforts that you all are looking at as well?
Well, I'll tell you this, Cincinnati Children's, from our CEO, Michael Fisher, down, he was instrumental in starting and founding the Minority Business Accelerator that's housed at the Regional Chamber of Commerce. So supplier diversity is very high on the list at Cincinnati Children's. And we work with a span of minority and women-owned businesses, from the micro, what I will call those businesses that are just graduating out of the mortar program, all the way through to the Minority Business Accelerator, which are our largest minority businesses within this area. Now, Cincinnati Children's, we have a net 45-day pay plan, but for the most part, I mean, in 10 years, I think that there's only one time where there was a payment issue with a supplier, and that was because somebody was out on vacation and something was sitting on somebody's desk. So we never have those issues. That being said, we did have suppliers that were in the queue to be paid. It was still under the 45 days, but working with our finance department, we were able to get those companies paid like in a matter of days. Because again, we know the importance of them getting their money and getting their money very quickly, because as Stephanie alluded to, you know, this could take any supplier out very, very quickly. We do have a food service and catering company that does business with us. And that particular company was supplying food to Cincinnati Children's on a weekly basis for our gift shop. Well, the gift shop had to be shut down. And so it's like, now what is this supplier going to do? So they were able to pivot and do some other things where they were offering curbside meals for not just Cincinnati Children's employees, but the community at large. And then not only the curbside pickup that they were offering, because this happened over a span of 3 holidays, Easter, Mother's Day, and now Memorial Day, they were able to provide holiday meals that you could also get. So again, and not only were we purchasing some of those as an organization, but as individual employees, we were purchasing. So just continuing to rally around the suppliers that were already a part of our supply base so that we can keep them going, because also something that came out of the small breakout session that we had, Marty had indicated that some of the suppliers within the transportation industry, they had to go out of business. I mean, they couldn't come back from this. And hopefully we're not seeing a whole lot of that, but we do know that some companies, small, established, minority, non-minority, are not able to come back from this. And so Cincinnati Children's as an organization, we were trying to say, what can we do to ensure that the diverse suppliers that are a part of our supply chain today would be able to withstand this? And then how do we look at continuing to bring on new diverse suppliers after this through innovation?
I love that you ended us there with the innovation. I just continue to, as we look at any good crisis, you got to take advantage of a good crisis, right? A lot of creativity and a lot of innovation comes out, and you shared a wonderful example, Jeiza, so thank you for that. Bryan, I'd love to have you jump in and talk a little bit about Cintas. You know, what are some of those innovations or creativities that we know that there was a lot of disruption, but certainly there's been a lot of lessons learned and probably some new ways forward that you'll adopt here forward. So do you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, absolutely, Amy. Appreciate it. You know, and again, greatly appreciating the perspective and obviously the actions that occurred and the focus from Children's and from Fifth Third across the community. And I guess so I'd like to kind of speak to some perspective of my personal experience kind of within the business, right? And whereas much as, you know, Cintas being a sales and service company with over 1 million business customers, we had to, you know, pause and realize the impact just in the immediate of non-essential business being shut down, but then quickly adjust and say, well, when they return, and as now they start to return, you know, our now tagline is ready for the workday, right? And our traditional customers being ready for the workday looks a lot different now in the last couple of weeks than it did, you know, pre-pandemic. And so that's caused us to shift, realizing, wow, those facilities aren't going to need maybe as many uniforms or as many facility service products because they're only half full, but they're going to need equal, if not more, of your personal protective equipment, your mask, your sanitizers, your sanitizing services, you know, maybe, you know, pre or post hours of operation. So we had to quickly then, from a supply chain standpoint, figure out how do we create and deliver on those solutions, because we might have done minimal amounts of those products pre-pandemic, but now became a, how much can we get, how fast can we get it? And then as Mike was alluding to, how can we ensure credibility at the supplier, the availability of inventory, and, you know, is it going to be what you want once you get it in the door, if you will? And so the challenge I think we've had in the last 6 to 8 weeks is how to evolve what some of those supply chain requirements are in terms of fast tracking supplier vetting and approval, taking some calculated responsible risk, but then also one of the areas I oversee is compliance in terms of regulatory. And I by no means am an expert in FDA or Health Canada, but partners on my team have had to quickly, I'll say, educate our peer group to realize wow, this is what it means to have an FDA certified face mask or a level 1 isolation gown. And you can't just start selling it and laundering it without going through proper protocols. And so we've been able to, manage internally. We've been able to partner with local companies and experts, Frost, Brown, Todd, Maureen's on the call here today, maybe to make sure I don't say anything incorrectly. But you bring in those experts, and they've been great in terms of speed and urgency to figure out how can we get solutions, how can we get speed to market, how can we interpret exceptions, right, that might be short-term under the pandemic that FDA has issued or possibly Health Canada, but then also realize and educating the business. Well, you can use it, but only during the pandemic. And once that's lifted, if you've got 6 months worth of inventory, you're not going to be able to use it the way you used to, right? And so those are things from a supply chain in the short term. We've been able to, I think, adjust and work with urgency. But to me, then going forward, what does that new normal look like? And how do we become efficient, high pace or quick pace, if you will, to meet business need so that we can bring the new products that are going to be needed for that ready for the workday, right? What's added to a first aid cabinet? What's added to a sanitizer offering or services of other types that's going to become the new normal across our business customers?
Bryan, I'm thinking about new offerings, and I think about the uniforms. Perhaps you could have Cintas labeled new pajama pants for everybody to wear from the work from home. That could be a great offering.
Well, that's right below like isolation gowns and face masks and everything else, but I'll submit that and give you full credit, Amy.
Okay, perfect. I look for some royalties on that, so good. Bryan, thank you. It is an opportunity for us to think differently and to really think about, okay, what matters right now and what matters for the future. We did want to, at this time, really open it up to the rest of the folks that are on the call. Feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. Any questions you'd like to pose to the entire group, and certainly the panelists can answer, or anyone else on the call. This is a chance for us to really share best practices, what's working, what's not working, how can we learn from each other right now. So anyone that would like to jump in, I'll take a moment, the floor is yours.
I was going to say, Amy, we have, Mike and I have a colleague that's on the line, Gloria Graham. Gloria is a part of the supply chain management team, but she brings a very unique perspective and background because she is a nurse by background and been with Cincinnati Children, if not close to 30 years, right over 30 years. And one of the things that I know, again, we have to vet products. So you say that you can offer something for Cincinnati Children. We have a whole vetting process. And sometimes that process might seem slow under normal circumstances. And so when you're trying to get something vetted under the speed of a pandemic, some suppliers are going to make it through the process. Other suppliers might not make it through the process for this particular time period, but they are suppliers that we can go back and take a look at. So not trying to put Gloria on the spot or nothing, but that was something, again, it's a very unique perspective because we have to have that medical and that clinical perspective and background when we are vetting all of the products that we have that come through the medical center.
Yeah, and Gloria is a nurse on our staff, and she's one of two that helps us with our value process. And I'll let Gloria jump in if she wants to jump in on, the infection control guidelines, the clinical guidelines, the performance of the product, from the nurse's perspective. She's our conduit to the clinical staff. So Gloria.
Okay, well, thanks. I wasn't expecting to talk today, but thanks for the opportunity. So as they explained, background, I've been an ER trauma nurse, been at Cincinnati Children's for 31 years, been working now in the value analysis within supply chain for 13 years. And, while I have a pretty vast, experience from a medical perspective, there still are a lot of nuances about certain types of medicine that I am not an expert in, and I don't claim to be an expert in every area of clinical practice throughout the organization. But that's where Heather and I, she brings a different subset of skills from her nursing practice, and I have a different subset of skills. And we're able to really blend that and be able to work with the clinicians throughout the organization. But, as Jeiza had talked about, everything typically goes through us first, and we can give that first review. We can help to determine the clinical requirements of the products and the services that we are using, and making sure that they are achieving the quality, the safety, the efficacy, all of those types of requirements that we need in order to help the clinicians achieve the outcomes that we have set for the organization. So definitely a different perspective using my skills as a clinician, but I look at it from the perspective of, as a former ER trauma nurse, I was able to, at that moment, taking care of patient, being able to provide the best care possible. Now I get to do that for the entire patient population that we service at Cincinnati Children's. And, for me, I think that that's just a very unique way that I get to use my skills. And especially in this time of the pandemic, it's even more critical.
Gloria, thank you. Your background is ideal really for that role. You certainly bring a very different lens to that, which is really helpful, I imagine. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'd be curious to hear from others on the call. I know we have a number of people who are not necessarily connected with healthcare, but have supply chain challenges and disruptions and questions. Is there anyone else on the call that is also experiencing, are you trying to fast track some different things, or what are other challenges that you all are facing that you'd like to just pose or put out there to the rest of the group? None. Perfect.
I think Andrew's on from the Health Collaborative. I think he can give perspective on what he witnessed through the area collaboration of, supply chain interaction. I think he'll give a perspective if he wants to chime in of what he witnessed being at the chamber there, or collaborative, I should say.
Yeah, Andrew Kristen and I had the pleasure of being in the small room with Andrew, and I don't think that man has really had much sleep in the last several months. Andrew, do you mind just sharing a quick perspective of your role and how you're managing that? Yes, I know it's still in the healthcare field, but I think it's helpful for others to really hear what you've been doing.
Yeah, thanks for that shout out, Mike. So it's been a very interesting transition for everyone at the Health Collaborative in general. I don't know how many of you know, but we coordinate the disaster preparedness for the entire region. And so when this hit, we became a little bit overrun. And so it was all hands on deck. My normal job is running the group purchasing organization for the Health Collaborative. And so having those connections to all the supply chain executives at the hospital, as well as with our skilled nursing facilities, long-term care facilities, any time that group had, our disaster preparedness group had vendors reaching out to them, those got forwarded to me to try to vet. And so thank God for the supply chain group that was meeting every week. I was able to ask them some questions, and they were able to provide me with questions of, hey, this is what we need to know from, and this is what you should be able to find out from them. If they answer properly to these questions, send them on to us. We'll continue through our process. If not, forget about them. Really, that's kind of the region in general. It's been a breath of fresh air to see everyone working together from the hospitals. Margaret Mary, who is a small hospital system out in Southeast Indiana and Batesville, they're running into some N95 mask shortages. TriHealth had had a handful of N95 masks that they weren't able to fit test because it just didn't make sense for them to fit test the amount of masks they had. So they were able to send those out to Margaret Mary, and then also help connect them with other supply chain leader or other vendors that they were working with to help secure some PPE for them. P&G reached out to the Health Collaborative because they were shifting to several of the locations to making 3-ply masks as well as hand sanitizer. And even we're looking at getting into nasal swabs for COVID testing. I was able to help, we were able to help get the masks where they needed to be. And like Mike mentioned earlier, the biggest issue with the hand sanitizer was that they only had them in 55-gallon drums. So kind of, I don't know how it worked out so well, but literally 2 days after P&G said they had 55-gallon drums, I got put in touch with the folks out at Bryan Distilling in Newtown, who had shifted already to bottling hand sanitizer, who were able to accept the hand sanitizer from P&G, put it in 750 milliliter bottles, and then get those distributed out where they needed to be within the community. Yeah, it's just been outpouring of collaboration amongst everyone in the city, wanting to help, and sometimes trying to help provide that guidance. And sometimes things didn't work out, but people were still willing to kind of do whatever they needed to do to help out the community. So.
Well, Andrew, a shout out and thank you to you. I know you've been coordinating a great deal behind the scenes, and I love the story of P&G has product. Now, how do you get it into the right bottle? Bryan shifted. Now, this does make me nervous from producing alcohol to hand sanitizer. They were doing that as well as they have the bottles. So now I wonder a little bit what I'm drinking, but that's fine. And I'll share that the chamber jumped in on that as well to say, hey, we're going to help pull us all together and make sure that people and businesses have access. So it's just been a really cool story, Andrew, to see how Health Collaborative and everyone kind of wrapped around to say, let's help businesses get back up and running. So I know we are up against time. I just wanted to say a special thank you to everyone, to our incredible panel. Gosh, Mike, Jeiza, Stephanie, Bryan, everyone else that jumped in here today and that participated in the small groups. And a special thank you to Stephanie and friends at Fifth Third for this whole platform. I do want to make sure everybody on the call knows about a resource, and that is Restart Cincinnati. And if you haven't had a chance, check out this website. It's again, restartcincinnati.com. This is where you can share PPE resources with each other. Businesses are also putting up their responsible return plans. So literally you can post, hey, how are you getting people back into the office? What does that look like? How are you managing? And really sharing best practices, because this is uncharted territory and we need each other through all of this. So please take advantage of restartcincinnati.com and also post what you're doing as well. We greatly appreciate that. So, thank you to everyone for being with us. If you have not really engaged with the Chamber, please consider engaging. We are really here to help businesses now, but also far into the future. We are building a supply chain roundtable. We have year-round roundtables. We have about 175 leaders that participate in 18 different groups. And the next group that we are building is a supply chain group. So if that's of interest, we'd love to share more. And I'll send you a note so you can have some more information. Next week, pass on to your IT friends. We will be having a similar conversation. However, it'll be around IT. And they've not had any disruptions either. So they certainly need a chance to come together and say, hey, how are you navigating? What does it look like? And how do we move forward? So from all of us at the Cincinnati USA Regional Chamber, I just want to say thanks again for being here today. We wish you, your family, your team members, we wish everyone well. And as we sign off today, all of our health friends that are on the call, I think, are going to agree with me. Please stay safe, wear those masks, respect social distancing, and as we sign off, go wash your hands again. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you. Thank you.
You.